My phone buzzed at 9:37 on a Tuesday evening, and I knew something was wrong before I even looked at the caller ID. Madison never called me this late unless she needed something, and her timing couldn't have been worse. I just settled into my favorite reading chair with a cup of chamomile tea and a new mystery novel when her voice cut through my peaceful evening like a knife. She didn't even say hello. Instead, she launched straight into the most devastating announcement I'd ever heard. I was uninvited from her wedding because I was socially unfit and would embarrass the family in front of Trevor's relatives. The words stung because they carried the weight of 28 years of accumulated slights and dismissals. Growing up in our suburban Denver home, Madison had always been the golden child who could do no wrong in our mother Patricia's eyes. While I spent afternoons curled up with books in the public library, Madison attended dance classes, beauty pageants, and social events that our mother insisted would build her character and connections. Our differences became more pronounced as we entered high school, where Madison ruled the popular crowd, while I found solace in academic clubs and the school newspaper. Our father, David, understood me in ways that Madison and Patricia never could. He would sneak into my room after dinner to ask about whatever novel I was reading, genuinely interested in my thoughts about character development and plot structure. He worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, and though he never made the kind of money that impressed Patricia's country club friends, he provided stability and unconditional love that made our modest lifestyle feel rich with possibility. When David was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, everything changed. The treatments drained our family savings, and Patricia's bitterness about their reduced social status poisoned every conversation. Madison stepped up as the favored daughter, accompanying Patricia to charity luncheons and maintaining the family's presence in social circles that no longer felt accessible to me. I spent most of my time at the hospital with Dad reading aloud from his favorite Mark Twain stories, while Madison attended fundraising galas and networking events. After Dad passed away 2 years ago, the divide in our family became a chasm. Patricia blamed me for encouraging his expensive treatments instead of accepting his diagnosis gracefully, as if prolonging his life had somehow been selfish. Madison rarely spoke to me except when she needed help with something practical like researching wedding vendors or proofreading her graduate school applications. The engagement to Trevor Hamilton had elevated Madison to a social stratosphere I'd never imagined possible. Trevor came from old money in Boston, the kind of family that owned summer houses in Martha's Vineyard and winter chalets in Vail. His parents moved in circles where charity galas cost $500 per plate and everyone summered in Europe. Madison had met him during her master's program in marketing at University of Denver, where he'd been guest lecturing about luxury brand management. Since the engagement announcement 18 months ago, Patricia had transformed into someone I barely recognized. She scrutinized every aspect of my appearance and lifestyle with newfound intensity, constantly pointing out how my career as a children's librarian made me unsuitable for sophisticated company. She would make cutting remarks about my thrift store clothing, my small apartment near downtown Denver, and my preference for quiet evenings at home over cocktail parties and social gatherings. The most painful discovery came last month when I realized Madison had been systematically erasing me from her social media presence. Photos of family gatherings were cropped to exclude me, and her Instagram stories about childhood memories somehow never featured any moments we'd shared together. When Trevor's friends asked about siblings, Madison would deflect or change the subject entirely, as if having a librarian sister somehow diminished her own accomplishments in their eyes. But tonight's phone call represented a new level of cruelty that I hadn't anticipated. Madison's voice carried no warmth or regret as she explained that Trevor's mother had specifically asked about the guest list, and Madison had decided it would be easier if I simply didn't attend. She claimed my quiet personality would make Trevor's relatives uncomfortable, and my inability to contribute meaningfully to conversations about travel, fine dining, or luxury shopping would reflect poorly on the family's social standing. After Madison hung up, I sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour, staring at my untouched tea until it grew cold. The rejection felt like a physical blow, but underneath the hurt something else began to emerge, a quiet determination that surprised me with its strength. Instead of calling Patricia to mediate or begging Madison to reconsider, I opened my laptop and began researching luxury mountain resorts in Colorado. The Alpine Sanctuary in Aspen caught my attention immediately. Nestled among snow-capped peaks at an elevation of 9,000 feet, the resort promised complete digital detox world-class spa treatments and gourmet farm-to-table dining experiences. The photographs showed rustic elegance, hand-hewn timber buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows, private balconies overlooking pristine wilderness, and amenities that cost more per night than I typically spent on groceries in a month. The presidential suite availability for the exact week of Madison's wedding felt like cosmic justice. I'd been saving $5,000 to buy Madison an extravagant wedding gift, something worthy of her new social status that might finally earn me some respect in her eyes. Instead, I transferred the entire amount toward a 7-day retreat that would coincide perfectly with her wedding festivities. My emergency fund contributed another $3,000 money I'd been hoarding for true disasters, like job loss or medical emergencies. But sitting alone in my apartment, feeling the sting of my sister's casual dismissal, this felt like exactly the kind of emergency that required dramatic action. I booked the most expensive package available: daily spa treatments, private hiking guides, gourmet meals prepared by a James Beard award-winning chef, and access to exclusive amenities typically reserved for celebrities and billionaires. The next morning, I called in vacation time at the library, explaining to my supervisor, Janet, that I needed to attend to urgent family matters. It wasn't technically a lie, though the urgent matter involved prioritizing my own mental health over my family's expectations for the first time in my adult life. Janet, who'd known me for 5 years and watched me work through every holiday while my coworkers traveled with their families, immediately approved the request without requiring documentation. Shopping for appropriate resort wear required stepping far outside my comfort zone. Instead of my usual discount retailers, I visited boutiques in Cherry Creek that catered to women who vacationed in places like Aspen regularly. The saleswoman, a sophisticated blonde named Cordelia, sized up my budget and lifestyle with practiced efficiency before selecting hiking boots that cost more than my monthly car payment and activewear that made me feel like someone entirely different. My best friend Sarah, a pediatric nurse at Denver Children's Hospital, met me for dinner the night before my departure. She listened with growing amazement as I described my plans, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief at my uncharacteristic extravagance. Sarah had watched Madison treat me like an inconvenience for years, and while she supported my decision to prioritize myself, she worried about the financial implications of such an expensive gesture of defiance. We sat in our favorite Thai restaurant sharing pad thai and spring rolls while I confided my deeper motivations. This wasn't just about Madison's wedding or Patricia's approval anymore. I'd spent my entire adult life accepting scraps of affection from family members who seemed embarrassed by my very existence. The resort represented something I'd never allowed myself before: the experience of being valued, pampered, and treated like someone whose comfort and happiness mattered. As I packed my new hiking gear and resort wear, I felt a mixture of anticipation and terror that kept me awake most of the night. The woman staring back at me from the bathroom mirror looked different somehow, as if making this decision had shifted something fundamental in my understanding of my own worth. Tomorrow I would board a first-class flight to Aspen, another extravagance that felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary. The presidential suite booking confirmation arrived in my email at 11:45 that night, complete with a welcome message from the resort concierge asking about dietary restrictions and preferred spa treatments. For the first time since Madison's devastating phone call, I smiled genuinely as I imagined myself soaking in a marble bathtub while my family dealt with wedding chaos without their reliable backup plan. The flight to Aspen unfolded like a dream I'd never dared to imagine for myself. First-class service included warm towels, gourmet meals served on actual china, and a flight attendant named Jessica, who anticipated my every need before I could voice it. As we descended through cloud cover toward the roaring Fork Valley, Snow-capped mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, creating a landscape so breathtaking that I pressed my face against the window, like a child seeing magic for the first time. The Alpine Sanctuary's shuttle service featured a luxury SUV with heated leather seats and a driver named Carlos, who provided fascinating commentary about local wildlife and geological formations during the 40-minute drive from the airport. He pointed out elk grazing near frozen streams and explained how the resort's architects had positioned every building to maximize mountain views while minimizing environmental impact. But nothing Carlos said prepared me for the moment we pulled into the resort's circular driveway. The main lodge rose from the landscape like something from a fairy tale constructed from massive timber beams and native stone that seemed to grow naturally from the mountainside. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sun off snow-covered peaks, and every architectural detail spoke of understated luxury that whispered, rather than shouted, its exclusivity. Elena Rodriguez, the guest services coordinator, greeted me personally at the reception desk with news that made my knees weak. Due to a last-minute cancellation by a European dignitary, my standard Mountain View room had been upgraded to the presidential suite at no additional charge. She apologized profusely for any inconvenience while handing me a key card and champagne welcome gift that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The presidential suite occupied the entire top floor of the lodge's east wing, accessed by a private elevator that required special key card authorization. When the doors opened directly into my temporary home, I stepped into a living space that belonged in architectural magazines. The main room featured a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, surrounded by furniture that managed to be both rustic and incredibly sophisticated. Hand-woven rugs covered wide plank hardwood floors, and every surface displayed art pieces that looked museum-worthy. The master bedroom opened onto a private balcony that jutted out over a cliff face, offering unobstructed views of 3 mountain ranges that stretched to the horizon in layers of blue and purple. The bathroom featured a soaking tub carved from a single piece of Colorado marble, positioned next to windows that could be opened to create an outdoor bathing experience while maintaining complete privacy. But the most luxury element was the silence. After years of living in a downtown apartment where sirens, traffic, and neighbor noise provided constant background soundtrack, the profound quiet of the mountains felt almost spiritual. The only sounds were wind through pine trees and the distant call of hawks circling thermal currents high above the valley floor. Elena had arranged for a welcome basket that included locally sourced honey artisanal chocolates made in nearby Glenwood Springs and a bottle of Colorado wine that had won international awards. She explained the resort's philosophy of digital detox, encouraging guests to store their phones in special lockboxes during meals and activities to maximize their connection with nature and their own inner peace. My first evening began with sunset yoga on the main deck, led by an instructor named Moonbeam, who had trained with masters in India and Thailand. The class attracted an eclectic mix of guests: a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley seeking relief from startup stress, a retired judge from Chicago celebrating her 70th birthday, and a famous novelist whose latest book had topped bestseller lists for 6 months. During the session, as we moved through poses while the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, I felt my body releasing tension I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. The stress of Madison's rejection, Patricia's constant criticism, and years of feeling invisible in my own family began melting away with each deep breath of pristine mountain air. Dinner in the resort's signature restaurant introduced me to cuisine that elevated local ingredients into art. Chef Antoine Dubois, who had earned 3 Michelin stars in France before relocating to Colorado for the lifestyle, personally presented each course with explanations of the sourcing and preparation techniques. Wild game harvested from the surrounding forests, vegetables grown in the resort's own greenhouses, and wines selected to complement the high-altitude environment created a meal that engaged all my senses. But the most unexpected discovery was how comfortable I felt in conversations with other guests. The retired judge Catherine Walsh had actually been a Broadway actress before pursuing law school in her 40s. She regaled our table with stories of performing Shakespeare while navigating early motherhood, and she seemed genuinely interested when I described my work developing literacy programs for underprivileged children at the library. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the pediatric surgeon from Boston, sat across from me during dessert and asked thoughtful questions about how reading therapy helped children cope with trauma and illness. His questions demonstrated a depth of understanding about child psychology that impressed me, and his easy laughter made the conversation feel natural rather than forced. When he mentioned his family's foundation work in education, I found myself sharing ideas about innovative library programming with an enthusiasm I rarely displayed in social settings. As the evening wound down, I retreated to my suite, feeling more relaxed and confident than I had in months. The marble bathtub beckoned, and I indulged in a long soak with lavender bath salts, while watching stars appear one by one in the crystal-clear mountain sky. For the first time since Madison's phone call, I wasn't thinking about her wedding or my family's dysfunction. Instead, I was fully present in my own experience, savoring luxury that felt earned rather than guilty. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp with temperatures hovering around 35 degrees and fresh snow dusting the highest peaks. While Madison prepared for her wedding 3 hours away in Denver, I laced up my new hiking boots for a guided mountain climbing experience that would take me to elevations above 11,000 feet. My phone remained locked in the suite's digital detox box, following Elena's suggestion to embrace complete disconnection from outside obligations. The climbing guide Jake Morrison was a former Olympic athlete who had relocated to Colorado after competing in winter sports internationally. He assessed my fitness level with professional expertise before designing a route that would challenge me without overwhelming a beginner. We started on gentle trails through aspen groves where golden leaves still clung to branches. Despite the advancing season, then gradually ascended toward rockier terrain that required actual climbing skills. Jake proved to be an excellent teacher, patiently demonstrating proper techniques for reading rock faces, testing handholds, and maintaining balance on challenging surfaces. As we climbed higher, the physical exertion demanded total focus that left no mental energy for family drama or wedding worries. My world narrowed to the immediate requirements of each movement, finding secure footing, distributing weight properly, and trusting my own strength to carry me upward. The summit offered panoramic views that defied description. Standing on a rocky outcrop with the entire roaring Fork Valley spread below, I felt simultaneously insignificant and powerful. Jake shared energy bars and hot chocolate from his thermos while pointing out distant peaks and explaining how geological forces had shaped this landscape over millions of years. The perspective shift was profound. My family's drama felt microscopic compared to the ancient, enduring beauty surrounding us. Meanwhile, back in Denver, Madison's carefully planned wedding was beginning to unravel in ways that would have been comical if they weren't so devastating. The morning started with minor irritations. The florist delivered arrangements in the wrong shade of pink. The photographer arrived 40 minutes late due to traffic, and Trevor's groomsmen showed up hungover from an impromptu bachelor party extension the night before. But these small problems were nothing compared to what unfolded during the ceremony itself. Trevor's best man, Chandler, had clearly continued drinking after the bachelor party ended. His speech during the reception became an uncomfortable, rambling mess that included inappropriate jokes about Madison's previous relationships and crude observations about marriage that made elderly relatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. The catering situation deteriorated into a full crisis when half the guests began experiencing food poisoning symptoms from improperly stored seafood appetizers. Trevor's mother, already suspicious of Madison's middle-class background, blamed the family for choosing a discount catering service that cut corners on food safety. Patricia found herself fielding complaints and demands for medical attention while trying to maintain dignity in front of Boston society matrons who regarded the entire event as evidence of poor breeding and inadequate planning. Madison's emotional state spiraled as each crisis compounded the previous one. The wedding dress that had looked perfect during fittings now felt too tight after months of stress eating, and her makeup required constant touch-ups due to tears of frustration and embarrassment. The photographer recovering from his late arrival struggled to capture flattering images, while guests fled to bathrooms or demanded early departures due to illness. But the most devastating moment came when Madison overheard Trevor arguing with his mother in the hotel lobby. Mrs. Hamilton was questioning whether Trevor truly understood what he was marrying into, pointing out the family's obvious financial strain and lack of social sophistication. She specifically mentioned the absence of Madison's sister as evidence that the family had secrets they were trying to hide. Trevor defended Madison initially, but his voice carried uncertainty that Madison recognized immediately. When Mrs. Hamilton suggested they postpone the honeymoon until the family's situation stabilized, Trevor didn't object with the fierce loyalty Madison had expected from her new husband. Instead, he agreed that perhaps they needed time to address underlying issues before beginning their married life together. As I descended the mountain trail that afternoon, my legs pleasantly tired from the climbing adventure, Madison was locked in a hotel bathroom, crying while Patricia fielded angry calls from Trevor's relatives, demanding explanations for the disaster. The wedding reception, intended to showcase Madison's successful integration into Boston high society, had instead highlighted every insecurity and class difference that the engagement had temporarily obscured. My evening included a therapeutic massage that worked out muscle tension from the day's climbing, followed by a farm-to-table dinner featuring locally raised lamb and vegetables harvested from the resort's organic gardens. Chef Antoine personally recommended wine pairings that enhanced each course, and I found myself engaged in fascinating conversations about sustainable agriculture with other guests who shared similar interests in environmental responsibility. Dr. Marcus joined me for after-dinner coffee in the lodge's library, an intimate space lined with first-edition books and featuring a crackling fireplace. We discovered a mutual love of mystery novels, and he shared stories about his work with young patients that revealed both professional expertise and genuine compassion. When he mentioned his family's foundation again, I found myself describing my dream of developing specialized literacy programs for children facing medical trauma ideas I'd never voiced to anyone before. The evening ended with stargazing from my private balcony, wrapped in a cashmere throw provided by the resort's turn-down service. The mountain air was so clear that the Milky Way appeared as a brilliant band across the sky, and the silence was broken only by the distant howl of coyotes echoing off canyon walls. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with my own company, unaware that my family's world was collapsing just a few hours' drive away. Sunday morning arrived with fresh snowfall that transformed the resort into a winter wonderland. But my peaceful bubble burst the moment I retrieved my phone from the digital detox box. The screen showed 43 missed calls, 67 text messages, and 17 voicemails that had accumulated since yesterday afternoon. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the notifications, each one more frantic than the last. Patricia's voicemails progressed from irritated to desperate over the course of 12 hours. The first message, left at 3:45 yesterday afternoon, demanded that I call her immediately to discuss Madison's wedding emergency. By midnight, her voice was raw with exhaustion and barely controlled panic as she begged me to return home and help salvage what remained of the family's reputation. Madison's text messages told a different story entirely. They started with terse demands for my immediate presence, claiming that my absence had somehow caused the catering disaster and guest illnesses. But as the hours passed, her tone shifted toward manipulation, suggesting that my selfishness in taking this vacation had cursed her special day. The final message, sent at 2:30 in the morning, was a single sentence that made my stomach churn. "Dad would be ashamed of how you abandoned me when I needed you most." Even distant relatives had joined the communication assault. Aunt Ruth from Phoenix left a confused voicemail asking why I hadn't attended the wedding, while my second cousin Barry from San Diego sent a text wondering if there had been a family emergency that explained my absence. Clearly, Madison and Patricia had fabricated some story to explain why the bride's only sister hadn't participated in the ceremony. Elena found me sitting in the lodge's breakfast area, staring at my phone with tears streaming down my face. Without asking questions, she gently took the device and set it aside, before signaling the kitchen staff to bring hot coffee and fresh pastries. Her kindness broke through my paralysis, and I found myself explaining the situation to someone who had no investment in my family's drama. Elena listened with the professional compassion of someone who had undoubtedly helped other guests navigate personal crises during their stays. She pointed out that genuine emergencies requiring my immediate presence would have involved hospital visits or legal issues, not wedding reception problems that adults should be capable of handling independently. Her perspective helped me recognize the manipulation tactics I'd been accepting as normal family dynamics for years. The breakfast conversation was interrupted by Dr. Marcus, who noticed my distress and asked Elena's permission to join us. When I explained the barrage of guilt-inducing messages, his expression shifted from concern to barely contained anger. As someone who dealt with actual life-and-death emergencies in his pediatric surgery practice, he found my family's manufactured crisis both manipulative and emotionally abusive. Marcus shared his own experience with family members who had tried to guilt him into abandoning medical school to manage their personal problems. His advice was simple but revolutionary for someone raised to prioritize others' comfort above my own well-being. I had every right to finish my vacation before addressing family drama that had existed long before this weekend and would continue regardless of my immediate response. Elena suggested we spend the morning reviewing my family's messages together, helping me identify which communications represented genuine concern versus manipulative pressure tactics. The exercise proved illuminating as patterns emerged that I'd never recognized before. Patricia's messages focused entirely on how my absence affected her social standing, while Madison's communications blamed me for problems that had clearly resulted from poor planning and unrealistic expectations. The most revealing discovery came when we analyzed the timeline of calls and messages. The first frantic communications had arrived before the wedding ceremony even began, suggesting that my family viewed me primarily as a crisis management resource, rather than someone whose presence they valued for emotional support. They hadn't missed me during happy moments. They'd only noticed my absence when problems required solving. But among all the manipulative messages, one stood out as genuinely surprising. Trevor himself had sent a brief text at 11:23 the night before. "Jacqueline, I owe you a sincere apology. After yesterday's events, I realize I judged you based on incomplete information. When you're ready, I'd welcome the chance to meet you properly and apologize in person. I'm sorry for any role I played in your exclusion. Trevor." The message's formal tone suggested someone raised with old-fashioned manners, but the content revealed a level of self-reflection that impressed me. Unlike my mother and sister's blame-shifting communications, Trevor had taken responsibility for his own assumptions and expressed genuine regret. Elena pointed out that his apology had arrived during what should have been his wedding night, indicating that the marriage celebration had gone even worse than the frantic family messages suggested. Marcus encouraged me to maintain radio silence until I felt emotionally prepared to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. He reminded me that my family had managed their own problems for decades without requiring my constant intervention, and their current crisis didn't constitute a legitimate emergency that demanded my immediate sacrifice of this hard-earned vacation time. We decided to spend the afternoon on a guided nature photography expedition that would keep me engaged in positive activities while processing the emotional impact of my family's manipulation attempts. The resort's photography instructor, a National Geographic contributor named Amanda Chen, specialized in helping guests capture the therapeutic beauty of mountain landscapes while learning mindfulness techniques. As we hiked through snow-covered meadows with our cameras, Amanda taught me to focus on immediate sensory experiences rather than abstract worries about future family confrontations. The practice of composing shots, adjusting lighting, and capturing perfect moments required total presence that gradually quieted the anxious chatter in my mind about my family's expectations and demands. The afternoon's final surprise came when we returned to the lodge to find Elena waiting with news that would change everything. She had received a call from someone claiming to be my family's representative, demanding information about my reservation and insisting that I be forced to check out immediately due to a fabricated medical emergency. Elena had handled the situation with professional discretion, but the attempted manipulation revealed new depths to my family's willingness to violate my privacy and autonomy. Monday morning brought revelations that shattered my remaining illusions about my family's version of events. While enjoying breakfast on my private balcony, I received a call from Janet Walsh, my supervisor at the library, who'd been contacted by someone claiming to be my emergency contact. The caller had demanded my exact location and requested that Janet convince me to return home immediately for unspecified family obligations. Janet, who had worked in public service long enough to recognize manipulation tactics, had refused to provide any information about my whereabouts. But the incident prompted her to call and warn me that someone was actively trying to track down my location through professional channels. The violation felt like a betrayal that went beyond normal family drama into genuinely disturbing territory. Elena suggested we contact the resort's security team to ensure that no unauthorized individuals could access information about my stay or gain entry to the property. The head of security, a former federal agent named Robert Kim, took the situation seriously and implemented additional privacy protections that made me realize how vulnerable I'd been to my family's increasingly desperate attempts at control. But the real truth began emerging through calls from unexpected sources. Aunt Ruth, my father's sister, who lived in Phoenix, reached out with information that made my blood run cold. She had received a frantic call from Patricia, explaining that I'd suffered a nervous breakdown and disappeared without explanation, leaving my family to wonder if I was safe or contemplating self-harm. Aunt Ruth had known me well enough to recognize this story as complete fabrication, but Patricia's tearful performance had been convincing enough to worry other relatives who didn't interact with me regularly. The realization that my mother was spreading lies about my mental health to manipulate extended family members into pressuring me represented a new low in emotional manipulation. The situation became even more disturbing when my former college roommate, Emma, called from Seattle. She'd been contacted through social media by someone claiming to be my sister, asking for help locating me because of concerns about my psychological state. Emma, who had maintained sporadic contact with me over the years, found the outreach suspicious enough to call me directly, rather than providing any information to the supposed family member. During our conversation, Emma revealed details about my family dynamics that she had observed during college, but never discussed. She remembered Patricia's constant criticism during parents' weekends and Madison's tendency to monopolize attention while dismissing my accomplishments. Emma had always wondered why I accepted treatment that she considered emotionally abusive, but she had respected my privacy rather than interfering in family relationships. The most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source, Trevor's college friend James, who had attended the wedding and felt compelled to reach out after witnessing the disaster firsthand. James had obtained my phone number from mutual acquaintances and called to provide an eyewitness account of events that differed dramatically from my family's version. According to James, the wedding had been plagued by problems that had nothing to do with my absence. The catering company had been hired at the last minute after Madison changed vendors 3 times seeking cheaper options. The photographer had been late because Patricia had provided incorrect venue information in an attempt to negotiate lower prices. Most of the guest illnesses resulted from improperly refrigerated seafood that had been sitting in warming trays for hours beyond safe consumption limits. But the most damaging revelation concerned Madison's behavior throughout the reception. When guests began asking about my absence, Madison had initially claimed I was traveling for work, then suggested I was dealing with personal problems, and finally insinuated that I had substance abuse issues that made me unsuitable for family events. The contradictory explanations had raised questions about our family's honesty and stability. James described Trevor's growing discomfort as he witnessed his new bride fabricating increasingly elaborate lies about her own sister. The situation had reached a breaking point when Trevor overheard Madison telling his mother that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous, which explained why they kept me isolated from respectable society. Trevor had confronted Madison privately, demanding to know the truth about my absence and her willingness to destroy my reputation to cover her own embarrassment. The argument had escalated into their first serious fight as a married couple, with Trevor questioning whether he truly knew the woman he had just promised to spend his life with. The honeymoon had been canceled not because of guest illnesses or catering problems, but because Trevor insisted they needed marriage counseling before traveling together. He had been particularly disturbed by Madison's casual cruelty towards someone who couldn't defend herself, viewing it as a character flaw that raised serious concerns about their future together. James also revealed information about Trevor's family background that explained his shock at Madison's behavior. The Hamiltons, despite their wealth and social status, prided themselves on treating service workers, distant relatives, and social inferiors with dignity and respect. Trevor had been raised to believe that character was demonstrated through kindness to those who couldn't provide any benefit in return. As I processed these revelations while sitting in the resort's meditation garden, I began to understand that my family's frantic communications weren't motivated by love or concern for my well-being. Instead, they were desperate to control the narrative and prevent me from learning the truth about how my absence had exposed their dysfunction to people whose opinions they valued. The afternoon brought another unexpected contact that would prove crucial to my growing understanding of the situation. Dr. Harrison Mills, a family friend who had known my father professionally, called to express condolences for my supposed breakdown and offer professional counseling services. When I explained that I was perfectly fine and enjoying a vacation, Dr. Mills was confused but relieved. During our conversation, Dr. Mills revealed that Patricia had contacted him with concerns about my psychological state, claiming that I had been exhibiting erratic behavior and making threats toward family members. She had requested documentation of my alleged mental health issues for legal purposes, presumably to establish grounds for some kind of intervention or guardianship proceeding. Dr. Mills, who had known me since childhood and understood my father's protective relationship with me, had been suspicious of Patricia's claims, but concerned enough to reach out directly. His professional assessment was that Patricia's behavior suggested someone engaged in a systematic campaign to discredit my reputation and autonomy, possibly for financial or legal reasons. The implications of Dr. Mills' observations were terrifying. If Patricia was willing to fabricate mental health crises and seek medical documentation of my supposed instability, she might be planning something far more serious than emotional manipulation. The realization that my own mother viewed me as an obstacle to be eliminated rather than a daughter to be loved marked a turning point in my understanding of our relationship. Tuesday afternoon shattered my mountain sanctuary when Elena appeared at my suite door with an expression of barely controlled frustration. Patricia and Madison had arrived at the resort unannounced, demanding immediate access to my room and insisting that I be forced to check out due to a family emergency. They had bypassed normal guest services protocols by claiming they had been sent by my therapist to conduct a psychological intervention for my own safety. Elena had handled the situation with professional grace, explaining that resort policy prohibited unauthorized access to guest quarters regardless of claimed family relationships. She had offered to contact me and arrange a meeting in the lobby if I chose to see them, but Patricia's increasingly aggressive demands and Madison's theatrical sobbing had attracted attention from other guests and required security intervention. I found them waiting in the main lobby, looking completely out of place among the resort's quietly elegant clientele. Patricia wore her most expensive dress and jewelry, but her forced smile couldn't disguise the anger radiating from her rigid posture. Madison had clearly been crying for hours, her makeup streaked and her designer outfit wrinkled from what must have been a frantic, early-morning drive from Denver. The contrast between their agitated energy and the resort's peaceful atmosphere was jarring. Other guests were reading quietly by the fireplace, engaging in soft conversations over afternoon tea, or enjoying the view of snow-capped peaks through floor-to-ceiling windows. Patricia and Madison's dramatic presence felt like a violation of the sanctuary I had created for myself. Patricia launched into her performance before I could even sit down, alternating between tearful appeals about family loyalty and angry accusations about my selfishness. She claimed that my absence from the wedding had ruined Madison's special day and damaged the family's reputation beyond repair. Her voice carried across the lobby despite Elena's gentle requests that she moderate her volume out of consideration for other guests. Madison's approach was more manipulative, focusing on emotional blackmail designed to trigger my lifelong pattern of guilt and accommodation. She described herself as devastated by my abandonment, claiming that she had always looked up to me as her big sister and couldn't understand why I would choose to hurt her so deliberately. Her performance was skillful, drawing on years of experience, manipulating my protective instincts. But something fundamental had shifted during my days at the resort. The luxury treatment, meaningful conversations with interesting people, and complete absence of family drama had reminded me what it felt like to be valued and respected. Patricia's familiar guilt tactics and Madison's crocodile tears no longer triggered my automatic compliance response. Instead, I found myself observing their behavior with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Patricia's anger seemed disproportionate to the supposed crisis, while Madison's grief appeared performative rather than genuine. They were following scripts that had worked effectively for years, but they hadn't anticipated encountering a version of me that refused to play my assigned role. The situation escalated when Patricia noticed other guests watching our interaction with obvious disapproval. The resort attracted sophisticated clientele who valued discretion and good manners, and Patricia's loud demands for my compliance were clearly violating unspoken social codes. Her embarrassment at being perceived as low class by the very type of people she aspired to impress only increased her desperation to reassert control over the situation. Madison attempted to salvage their intervention by shifting tactics toward fake concern for my mental health. She suggested that my decision to spend thousands of dollars on a luxury vacation represented evidence of psychological instability that required professional intervention. Her implication that I was incapable of making rational financial decisions felt particularly insulting, coming from someone whose wedding had been funded by money stolen from my inheritance. Elena watched the confrontation from the concierge desk, ready to intervene if their behavior became disruptive enough to require removal from the property. Other staff members positioned themselves strategically around the lobby, their professional training evident in their ability to monitor the situation while maintaining normal operations for other guests. The turning point came when Patricia demanded to know how I could afford such an expensive vacation on a librarian's salary, insinuating that I must be engaged in some kind of financial impropriety. Her accusation revealed the depth of her ignorance about my actual life and financial management, but it also demonstrated her willingness to publicly question my integrity to gain leverage in the argument. Dr. Marcus appeared unexpectedly, having returned from a morning hiking expedition, just as Patricia's voice reached its highest volume. His presence immediately altered the dynamic of the confrontation, as Patricia and Madison suddenly realized they were performing their family drama in front of someone whose good opinion might actually matter to my future well-being. Marcus approached with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations, introducing himself to my mother and sister with impeccable manners that highlighted their own lack of social grace. His questions about their sudden arrival and demands for my departure were polite, but pointed, making it clear that he found their behavior concerning rather than supportive. When Patricia attempted to explain that they were rescuing me from my own poor judgment, Marcus responded with observations about my obvious good health, clear thinking, and appropriate social behavior during our conversations over the past few days. His professional assessment carried weight that undermined their claims about my supposed psychological instability. The confrontation reached its climax when Madison accused Marcus of taking advantage of my vulnerable state, suggesting that he was somehow manipulating me for his own purposes. Her accusation revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of healthy adult relationships that it shocked everyone within hearing distance, including several resort staff members who had witnessed my positive interactions with other guests. Marcus handled Madison's accusation with surgical precision, explaining that his interest in my well-being was based on respect for my intelligence, kindness, and interesting conversation, rather than any perceived vulnerability. His response highlighted the insulting assumptions underlying Madison's worldview, where my value existed only in relation to my usefulness to family members. Elena finally intervened when it became clear that Patricia and Madison had no intention of respecting my right to finish my vacation in peace. She explained that their continued presence was disturbing other guests and violated the resort's policies regarding harassment of registered visitors. Security personnel were prepared to escort them from the property if they couldn't moderate their behavior immediately. The ultimate humiliation for Patricia came when Elena quietly mentioned that several other guests had expressed concern about the family emergency that seemed to involve wealthy strangers verbally attacking a obviously well-adjusted young woman. The implication that sophisticated observers had judged the situation and found Patricia and Madison's behavior inappropriate rather than justified left them speechless for the first time since their arrival. The moment Patricia and Madison realized that their usual manipulation tactics were failing spectacularly in front of witnesses whose opinions mattered, something shifted in the lobby's atmosphere. I could see the calculation in Patricia's eyes as she recognized that continuing their aggressive approach would only further damage their credibility with the type of people she desperately wanted to impress. Marcus positioned himself slightly behind my chair, not protectively but supportively, his presence serving as a reminder that I had allies who valued my well-being above family politics. Elena remained at the concierge desk monitoring the situation with professional discretion, while other staff members continued serving guests who were obviously curious about the unfolding drama. For the first time in my adult life, I held the power in a family confrontation. Patricia and Madison needed something from me, but I was under no obligation to provide it. The luxury resort setting emphasized my independence and autonomy, while their desperate drive from Denver highlighted their lack of control over my choices and decisions. I decided to address their accusations directly, speaking in the calm, measured tone I used when helping upset library patrons resolve research problems. My voice carried clearly across the elegant lobby as I systematically dismantled their version of events, citing specific examples of their dishonesty and manipulation that had become obvious once I gained perspective from physical and emotional distance. Patricia's face went white when I described her fabricated stories about my mental health crisis, particularly her attempts to convince relatives and professional contacts that I was psychologically unstable and potentially dangerous. The realization that I knew about her deception campaign clearly terrified her, suggesting that she had committed to lies that could have serious legal and social consequences. Madison's reaction was more complex, cycling between defensive anger and genuine shame as I recounted her systematic erasure of me from her social media presence and public narratives. When I mentioned her willingness to invent substance abuse problems and mental health issues to explain my absence to wedding guests, she seemed to recognize the cruelty of her behavior for the first time. But the most devastating moment came when I addressed their financial motivations directly. Speaking clearly enough for nearby guests to hear, I explained how Patricia had been intercepting birthday and holiday cards intended for me, including ones containing money from relatives who assumed I was receiving their gifts and good wishes. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Patricia's attempts to deny the charge fell flat when I mentioned specific amounts and occasions that I couldn't have known about unless I had evidence of her theft. Madison's horrified expression suggested that she was learning about this betrayal for the first time. Other resort guests were no longer pretending to ignore our conversation, their sophisticated sensibilities clearly offended by the revelation of financial impropriety within a family. The social context that Patricia had hoped would pressure me into compliance was now working against her as witnesses formed judgments about her character, based on behavior they could observe directly. Dr. Marcus contributed to the power shift by mentioning in passing his family's involvement in charitable foundation work that required careful vetting of potential partners and beneficiaries. His casual reference to background investigation procedures sent a clear message that Patricia's behavior was being evaluated by people with resources and connections she couldn't control or manipulate. Elena approached our group with news that would prove crucial to the changing dynamic. Catherine Walsh, the retired Broadway actress who had befriended me during my stay, had recognized Patricia from newspaper coverage of a charity embezzlement scandal 20 years earlier. Catherine had discreetly shared this information with Elena, who felt I should be aware of my mother's history before making decisions about family reconciliation. The revelation that Patricia's past included financial impropriety at a children's charity where she had volunteered explained so much about her current behavior patterns. Her desperation to maintain social standing and her willingness to steal from her own daughter suggested someone who had never learned appropriate boundaries around other people's money and trust. Madison's world visibly crumbled as she processed this new information about the woman who had shaped her values and priorities. The mother she had admired and emulated for her social climbing abilities was revealed as someone with a documented history of betraying vulnerable people for personal gain. Patricia's attempts to minimize or deny Catherine's recognition failed miserably when Elena mentioned that Catherine maintained extensive connections in Denver's charity and social circles. The implication that Patricia's past would be thoroughly investigated and widely discussed if this confrontation continued publicly clearly terrified her. The final blow to Patricia's position came when Marcus quietly shared that his family's foundation had been among the organizations that investigated the charity scandal Catherine remembered. He had access to detailed records of Patricia's financial manipulations and could verify the accuracy of any accusations against her without difficulty. Faced with the prospect of having her past exposed to exactly the type of people whose approval she craved most desperately, Patricia finally agreed to discuss the situation privately rather than continuing the public confrontation. But the damage to her credibility and authority had already been done in front of witnesses who would remember her behavior and judge her accordingly. Madison requested a private conversation with me, her voice small and defeated in a way I had never heard before. The confident, manipulative sister who had dismissed me so casually just days earlier was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to recognize the magnitude of her mistakes for the first time. As we moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, I realized that the family dynamics that had defined my entire life had shifted permanently. Patricia and Madison were no longer the arbiters of my worth and value. Instead, they were revealed as flawed people whose opinions carried no more weight than anyone else's judgments about my choices and behavior. The conversation that followed would determine whether any relationship between us could be salvaged, but for the first time in my adult life, I held the power to set the terms and conditions of my family's access to my time, energy, and forgiveness. The private conversation with Madison took place in the resort's intimate library, surrounded by first edition books and the gentle crackling of a wood fire. Away from Patricia's domineering presence and the public pressure of the main lobby, Madison seemed to shrink into herself, becoming someone I barely recognized as the confident, dismissive sister who had excluded me from her wedding just days earlier. She began with what appeared to be genuine remorse, admitting that she had been jealous of my relationship with our father and resentful of my academic achievements throughout our childhood. The confession surprised me because I had always assumed Madison preferred Patricia's attention and approval over Dad's quieter affection. Learning that she had envied our shared love of books and intellectual conversations revealed depths to her insecurity that I had never suspected. But Madison's most devastating admission concerned the financial pressure she had been under since Trevor's engagement announcement. His family's wealth and social expectations had terrified her into accumulating massive credit card debt while trying to fit into their lifestyle. Designer clothing, expensive social events, beauty treatments, and wedding planning costs had created financial obligations that far exceeded her marketing job salary. Patricia had enabled Madison's overspending by providing access to money that I now realized must have come from my intercepted cards and manipulated inheritance funds. The revelation that my own savings had been funding Madison's attempt to buy acceptance from Trevor's family added another layer of betrayal that was almost too painful to process fully. Madison's tears seemed genuine as she described the crushing anxiety of maintaining appearances while knowing she couldn't afford the lifestyle she was attempting to project. Every social event with Trevor's friends had been an exercise in terror, wondering if someone would ask questions she couldn't answer or notice details that revealed her actual financial situation. The wedding planning had become particularly stressful because Patricia insisted on competing with Boston society standards, using money they didn't actually possess. The catering changes, venue modifications, and last-minute vendor switches had all been motivated by financial constraints that Madison was too proud to admit to Trevor or his family. But the most shocking revelation concerned Trevor's growing awareness of the deception. He had begun asking uncomfortable questions about wedding expenses, family financial situations, and Madison's evasiveness about her background months before the ceremony. His questions had triggered panic attacks that Madison had hidden by blaming stress on normal wedding planning pressures. Madison admitted that excluding me from the wedding had been motivated by fear that my presence would expose the family's true financial and social status. She had convinced herself that my librarian career, modest apartment, and simple lifestyle would embarrass her in front of Trevor's sophisticated relatives. The irony that her own behavior had been far more embarrassing than my honest authenticity seemed to be dawning on her for the first time. Catherine Walsh's recognition of Patricia had triggered a crisis that went far beyond wedding day disasters. Trevor had been quietly investigating our family's background through private channels available to wealthy Boston families, and Patricia's history of charity embezzlement had already been discovered and verified through multiple sources. Madison revealed that Trevor's mother had confronted her privately about Patricia's past, demanding explanations for why Madison had never mentioned her mother's criminal history. The conversation had been devastating because Madison genuinely hadn't known about the charity scandal, having been too young at the time to understand the significance of Patricia's sudden departure from volunteer activities. Mrs. Hamilton's investigation had also uncovered inconsistencies in the stories Madison had told about our family structure and relationships. The absence of photos, including me, the vague explanations about my absence from family events, and Madison's inability to discuss normal sibling interactions had raised red flags about possible family dysfunction or hidden problems. Trevor's decision to postpone their honeymoon hadn't been motivated by wedding day disasters, but by his discovery of Madison's systematic dishonesty about fundamental aspects of her identity and family background. He had told Madison that he couldn't build a marriage on lies and needed time to determine whether she was capable of the honesty and integrity his family considered essential character traits. The marriage counseling sessions had become exercises in revealing deception after deception, from financial irresponsibility to family relationship manipulation to outright lies about my mental health and character. Trevor's trust in Madison had been shattered not by any single revelation, but by the cumulative weight of discovering that nearly everything she had told him about herself was either false or misleading. Madison's voice broke completely as she described Trevor's questions about why she felt comfortable spreading lies about her own sister's mental health and character. He'd been particularly disturbed by her willingness to destroy my reputation to cover her own embarrassment, viewing it as evidence of moral bankruptcy that raised serious questions about her fitness as a potential mother to his children. The conversation was interrupted by Elena's discreet announcement that Patricia had been asked to leave the main lobby after becoming increasingly agitated and disruptive toward other guests. Hotel security was prepared to escort her from the property if she couldn't control her behavior, but they wanted to give Madison an opportunity to intervene before taking formal action. Madison's request for my help in managing Patricia's meltdown represented a complete reversal of our family's traditional power dynamics. For the first time in our adult relationship, Madison was acknowledging that I possessed skills and emotional stability that she lacked, and she was asking for my assistance rather than demanding my compliance. But as we prepared to rejoin Patricia in the lobby, Madison made one final admission that would prove crucial to everything that followed. She revealed that Patricia had been accessing my father's trust fund, using forged documents for nearly 3 years, stealing money that Dad had specifically designated for my education and future security. The embezzlement of my inheritance represented a betrayal so profound that it transcended normal family conflict and entered the realm of serious criminal behavior. Patricia hadn't just been manipulating family relationships or intercepting greeting cards. She had been systematically robbing me of financial security that my father had worked his entire life to provide. Armed with this knowledge, I prepared to confront Patricia with a completely different understanding of our family's power dynamics and my own legal rights in the situation that was about to unfold. Patricia's expulsion from the main lobby had created a scene that would be discussed among resort guests for weeks to come. Elena briefed me on the situation as Madison and I prepared to deal with the aftermath of her mother's public meltdown. Apparently, Patricia had become increasingly agitated when other guests began whispering about Catherine's recognition, eventually demanding that hotel security remove anyone who dared to judge her, based on decades-old gossip. The confrontation had escalated when Patricia accused the resort staff of discrimination and threatened to sue for emotional distress caused by their refusal to force me to leave with her immediately. Her threats had fallen flat when Elena calmly explained that the resort's legal team included former federal prosecutors who specialized in fraud cases, and they would be delighted to investigate any claims Patricia wished to pursue through official channels. Dr. Marcus approached me with information that would prove crucial to my understanding of the legal implications surrounding Patricia's theft of my inheritance. His family's foundation employed attorneys who specialized in estate fraud and trust fund manipulation, and he had taken the liberty of consulting with them about the general circumstances I had described during our earlier conversations. The legal experts had confirmed that forging documents to access trust funds constituted serious federal crimes, carrying potential prison sentences of up to 20 years. Patricia's systematic theft of my inheritance wasn't a family dispute that required mediation. It was criminal behavior that warranted investigation by law enforcement agencies with jurisdiction over financial fraud cases. Marcus offered to connect me with his family's legal team, emphasizing that their services would be provided at no cost as part of their foundation's mission to protect vulnerable individuals from financial exploitation. The offer represented access to legal resources that would normally be far beyond my financial means, and it came with the backing of a family whose wealth and influence could ensure that Patricia's crimes received appropriate attention from authorities. Elena had prepared a private conference room where we could discuss the situation without disturbing other guests or providing entertainment for curious observers. The room featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-covered peaks, elegant furnishings that spoke of quiet wealth and complete privacy for conversations that would determine my family's future relationships and legal obligations. Madison entered the room looking like someone who had aged years in the span of hours. Patricia followed reluctantly, her earlier aggression replaced by the sullen resentment of someone who realized her manipulation tactics had not only failed, but backfired spectacularly. The contrast between their defeated energy and the room's peaceful elegance was stark and somehow appropriate. I began the conversation by addressing Patricia directly about the trust fund theft that Madison had revealed. Speaking in the calm, measured tone I had learned from years of helping library patrons navigate complex research problems, I outlined my understanding of the financial crimes she had committed and the legal consequences she now faced. Patricia's initial response was predictable denial, claiming that she had legitimate access to the trust fund as my father's widow and executor of his estate. Her explanation fell apart immediately when I mentioned specific legal requirements for trust fund access that she clearly hadn't understood when forging the necessary documentation. The devastating moment came when I explained that Marcus had already connected me with attorneys who specialized in exactly these types of fraud cases. Patricia's face went ashen as she realized that her crimes would be investigated by legal professionals with the resources and expertise to pursue prosecution regardless of her ability to pay for expensive defense attorneys. Madison's reaction was equally dramatic, but for different reasons. Learning that her entire adult lifestyle had been funded by money stolen from her sister triggered a psychological crisis that was painful to witness. She had built her identity around being the successful, sophisticated daughter who deserved nice things, only to discover that her advantages had been purchased through criminal behavior. Patricia attempted to minimize the severity of her crimes by claiming that she had always intended to repay the money once Madison's marriage to Trevor stabilized the family's financial situation. Her explanation revealed the depth of her delusion about the legal and moral implications of trust fund theft, as well as her assumption that Madison's wealthy husband would somehow provide retroactive justification for criminal behavior. But the most shocking revelation came when Patricia admitted that the trust fund theft was just the beginning of her financial crimes against me. She had also forged my signature on documents related to my father's life insurance policy, claiming benefits that should have come to me as the primary beneficiary. The insurance money had funded Madison's graduate school education wedding expenses and the lifestyle improvements that Patricia had used to maintain her social standing. The total amount of money stolen from my inheritance exceeded $200,000, plus 3 years of accumulated interest and investment growth that would have occurred if the funds had remained in legitimate accounts. Patricia had essentially robbed me of the financial security that my father had worked his entire adult life to provide, using the money to maintain a lifestyle that her own income couldn't support. Marcus quietly excused himself to make phone calls to the legal team, returning within an hour with news that would change everything about Patricia's situation. The attorneys had already begun preliminary research into the trust fund documentation, and their initial findings suggested that Patricia's crimes were extensive enough to warrant immediate investigation by federal authorities. The conversation was interrupted by an unexpected arrival that shocked everyone in the room. Trevor appeared at the conference room door, having driven through the night from Denver after receiving disturbing reports about the confrontation at the resort. His presence immediately altered the dynamic of our family crisis, bringing an outside perspective that forced everyone to confront how our dysfunction appeared to objective observers. Trevor's first action was to approach me directly with an apology that demonstrated the kind of character and integrity that Madison had been trying to fake throughout their relationship. He acknowledged that he had judged me based on incomplete and deliberately misleading information provided by Madison and Patricia, and he expressed genuine regret for his role in my exclusion from their wedding. But Trevor's most significant contribution to the conversation was his revelation that his family had been conducting their own investigation into Patricia's background since the wedding disaster. The Hamilton family's private investigators had uncovered extensive evidence of Patricia's financial crimes, including documentation that could be used to support criminal prosecution. Trevor explained that his family took reputation and character seriously enough to thoroughly vet anyone who married into their circle. Patricia's history of charity embezzlement combined with her recent theft of trust fund money had raised red flags that prompted professional investigation by people with resources and connections far beyond what our family could access or resist. The most devastating blow to Patricia's position came when Trevor quietly mentioned that his family's attorneys had already contacted federal authorities about potential fraud cases involving my inheritance. The investigation was proceeding regardless of my personal decisions about prosecution, because the Hamilton family refused to be associated with criminal financial behavior through marriage connections. Patricia's final attempts at manipulation focused on emotional blackmail designed to prevent me from cooperating with legal authorities. She claimed that prosecuting her would destroy what remained of our family relationships and leave Madison without maternal support during her marital crisis. Her appeals to family loyalty rang hollow after years of prioritizing her social status over my well-being. Madison surprised everyone by rejecting Patricia's manipulation attempts and encouraging me to pursue whatever legal remedies I felt were appropriate. Her willingness to support justice over family loyalty represented genuine growth that offered hope for our future relationship, even if it came too late to save her marriage to Trevor. The afternoon ended with clear understanding that Patricia faced serious legal consequences regardless of my personal preferences about forgiveness or family reconciliation. The wheels of justice were already in motion, powered by people with resources and influence far beyond what our small family drama could control or manipulate. The evening brought a period of reflection that allowed me to process the magnitude of the legal and emotional revelations that had transformed my family relationships forever. Dr. Marcus had arranged for dinner to be served in the private conference room, ensuring that we could continue our discussions without interruption or public attention from other resort guests. Trevor's presence had introduced a perspective on consequences that none of us had fully considered. His family's wealth and social influence meant that Patricia's crimes would receive attention from law enforcement agencies that might otherwise overlook financial fraud cases involving smaller amounts of money. The Hamilton name carried enough weight to ensure thorough investigation and appropriate prosecution regardless of our family's preferences. But Trevor also brought news about the broader implications of Patricia's criminal behavior for Madison's future prospects and social standing. The Boston social circles that Madison had been so desperate to join would inevitably learn about her mother's fraud convictions, and the association would damage Madison's reputation permanently unless she took decisive action to distance herself from Patricia's choices. Marcus returned from another consultation with his family's legal team, bearing documents that outlined my options for pursuing restitution and criminal prosecution. The attorneys had advised that Patricia's crimes were serious enough to warrant federal charges, but they had also emphasized my right to negotiate terms that prioritized financial recovery over punitive measures. The legal experts had identified 3 potential paths forward. Full criminal prosecution would likely result in Patricia's imprisonment and complete restitution of stolen funds, but it would also create public records that would follow our family permanently. Civil action would focus on financial recovery while avoiding criminal penalties, but it would require ongoing legal battles that could last for years. The third option involved negotiated settlement that would provide immediate restitution in exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal charges. I found myself in the unexpected position of holding absolute power over Patricia's future. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The legal resources available to me were extensive, and the consequences of prosecution would be severe enough to destroy her completely. For someone who had spent decades accepting emotional crumbs from family members who treated me as an inconvenience, the reversal of power dynamics was almost intoxicating. Trevor shared additional information about how Patricia's crimes had affected Madison's marriage prospects beyond the immediate wedding disasters. His mother had been questioning not just Madison's honesty about family background, but her fundamental fitness as a potential Hamilton family member. The systematic deception and financial fraud raised concerns about inherited character flaws that could affect future generations. But Trevor also revealed that his feelings for Madison were complicated by recognition that she had been raised by someone who modeled manipulation, dishonesty, and financial irresponsibility as normal family behavior. He wondered whether Madison was capable of genuine change or whether her patterns of deception were too deeply ingrained to overcome through counseling and good intentions. Madison's response to Trevor's concerns demonstrated growth that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of defensive justifications or emotional manipulation, she acknowledged that her behavior had been unacceptable and expressed understanding for his family's concerns about her character and trustworthiness. Her willingness to take responsibility without making excuses represented genuine progress toward becoming someone worthy of respect. The most difficult moment came when Madison asked for my honest assessment of her character and potential for change. Trevor had specifically requested my opinion because I had observed her behavior over decades and would have insights into whether her recent remorse represented genuine transformation or temporary regret motivated by consequences. I found myself in the position of either condemning Madison's chances for happiness or offering hope for redemption that might not be justified by her history of cruelty and manipulation. The decision felt enormous because Trevor clearly valued my opinion enough to let it influence his choice about whether to continue their marriage. After careful consideration, I told Trevor that Madison had demonstrated capacity for both kindness and cruelty throughout our childhood, but that Patricia's influence had consistently rewarded her worst impulses while punishing empathy and authenticity. I believed that Madison could change if she was willing to separate herself from Patricia's toxic influence and commit to the hard work of rebuilding her character from foundational principles. But I also emphasized that change would require Madison to make amends for years of harmful behavior toward people who couldn't benefit her socially or financially. True character development would be demonstrated through her treatment of service workers, distant relatives, and social inferiors rather than her ability to charm people whose approval she craved. Trevor listened to my assessment with the careful attention of someone making a decision that would affect his entire future. He asked follow-up questions about specific examples of Madison's capacity for growth and her willingness to prioritize integrity over social advancement. His questions revealed someone who took character seriously enough to base major life decisions on careful evaluation of moral foundations. The conversation was interrupted by Patricia's attempt to negotiate privately with me about the terms of potential settlement agreements. She had apparently spent the afternoon researching the legal consequences she faced and realized that criminal prosecution would result in imprisonment that could last for decades, given her advanced age and poor health. Patricia's settlement offer involved full restitution of stolen funds, plus interest-written acknowledgement of her crimes and public apology to family members who'd been deceived by her lies about my character and mental health. In exchange, she requested my agreement not to pursue criminal charges that would result in imprisonment and permanent destruction of what remained of her social standing. The offer represented everything I could have hoped to achieve through legal action, but it also carried the moral weight of allowing someone who had committed serious crimes to escape the consequences that would typically apply to such behavior. Patricia was essentially asking me to prioritize family relationships over justice, the same pattern of enabling that had allowed her crimes to continue for years. Marcus advised me to consider the broader implications of my decision for other potential victims of similar crimes. Allowing Patricia to escape criminal prosecution might encourage other people to commit trust fund fraud if they believed that family pressure could prevent appropriate consequences. The precedent I set could affect how similar cases were handled in the future. The evening ended with my announcement that I needed time to consider Patricia's settlement offer before making decisions that would affect everyone's future. But I also made clear that any agreement would require Patricia to accept full responsibility for her crimes and their impact on our family relationships without attempts to minimize or justify her behavior. The decision about Patricia's settlement offer required careful consideration of factors that extended far beyond my personal desire for justice or family harmony. Dr. Marcus had arranged for me to speak directly with his family's attorneys via video conference, allowing me to understand the full implications of each potential choice without the pressure of family members advocating for their preferred outcomes. The legal experts explained that white-collar crimes like trust fund fraud typically resulted in prison sentences because financial exploitation of family members represented particularly serious violations of trust that deserved strong deterrent punishment. However, they also acknowledged that prosecution consumed enormous amounts of time, energy, and emotional resources that could be directed toward more positive purposes if restitution was achievable through alternative means. The attorneys advised that my age and financial situation made immediate restitution more valuable than the satisfaction of seeing Patricia imprisoned for crimes that had already been committed and couldn't be undone through punishment. They emphasized that criminal prosecution would provide public vindication, but wouldn't necessarily serve my long-term interests in building financial security and moving forward with my life. After extensive consultation and careful consideration of all factors involved, I decided to accept Patricia's settlement offer with modifications that would ensure accountability while allowing our family to begin healing from decades of toxic dysfunction. The terms I negotiated were designed to provide justice without vengeance, consequences without destruction. Patricia would provide full restitution of the $215,000 she had stolen from my trust fund and insurance benefits, plus accumulated interest and penalties that brought the total to nearly $300,000. She would also pay for all legal fees associated with investigating her crimes and negotiating the settlement agreement. But financial restitution was only part of the accountability I required. Patricia would provide written acknowledgement of her crimes and their impact on our family, including specific admission that she had deliberately stolen money intended to provide for my future security. The document would serve as legal protection against future attempts to minimize or deny her criminal behavior. Patricia would also be required to contact every family member and family friend who had been told lies about my character, mental health, or reasons for missing Madison's wedding. She would provide full correction of these false narratives, along with apology for any distress or confusion her deception had caused among people who cared about my well-being. The settlement included provisions for ongoing accountability that would prevent Patricia from returning to her previous patterns of manipulation and financial irresponsibility. She would be required to attend weekly therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in financial crimes and personality disorders, and she would provide quarterly reports on her progress toward developing appropriate boundaries and ethical behavior. Madison's response to the settlement terms surprised everyone with its maturity and insight. Instead of defending Patricia or minimizing her crimes, Madison expressed gratitude that I was willing to provide their mother with opportunities for redemption rather than pursuing maximum punishment through criminal prosecution. Her reaction suggested genuine understanding of the gravity of Patricia's behavior and its impact on our family relationships. But Madison also announced her own decision to pursue accountability and personal growth that went far beyond what anyone had requested or expected. She had decided to return her engagement ring to Trevor and request time to rebuild herself as a person before attempting to salvage their marriage or pursue any serious romantic relationship. Madison explained that living with the consequences of her dishonesty and manipulation had taught her that she didn't actually know who she was when she wasn't performing for other people's approval. Her entire adult identity had been constructed around impressing others rather than developing authentic character, and she needed time to discover what kind of person she wanted to become. Trevor's response to Madison's decision revealed the depth of his character and the sincerity of his feelings for her, despite everything that had happened. Instead of expressing relief at being released from their troubled marriage, he asked if they could remain in contact while she worked on personal growth, with the possibility of rebuilding their relationship on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. The conversation between Madison and Trevor was private, but the outcome suggested that genuine love could survive even serious betrayals if both people were willing to commit to the hard work of earning trust and developing authentic intimacy. Their decision to approach their relationship as adults who needed to prove their worthiness to each other represented hope for genuine happiness based on reality rather than fantasy. Patricia's reaction to the settlement terms was complex cycling between relief at avoiding imprisonment and resentment at being required to accept full responsibility for her behavior without excuses or justifications. But her agreement to the terms seemed motivated by genuine recognition that she had committed serious crimes that deserved significant consequences. The legal paperwork required several days to complete, during which time Patricia began the process of liquidating assets and arranging financing to provide immediate restitution of stolen funds. The attorneys had structured the settlement to ensure that I would receive full compensation within 30 days, regardless of Patricia's ability to manage the financial logistics involved. Elena had arranged for me to extend my stay at the resort while legal matters were resolved, ensuring that I could complete this transformative experience without the stress of returning to normal life before processing everything that had happened. The additional days would provide time for reflection planning and transition between the person I had been when I arrived and the person I was becoming through this experience. Dr. Marcus had also made arrangements that would prove crucial to my future happiness and career development. His hospital in Boston was launching a new therapeutic reading program for pediatric patients, and he had offered me the position of program director with a salary that would more than double my current income while allowing me to pursue meaningful work that honored my father's memory. The offer represented far more than professional advancement. It was an invitation to build a new life surrounded by people who valued my intelligence, compassion, and authentic personality. The prospect of relocating to Boston felt like stepping into a future that reflected my actual worth rather than my family's limited perception of my potential. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of Boston Children's Hospital, wearing professional attire that reflected my new role as Director of Therapeutic Reading Programs and feeling more confident than I had ever imagined possible. The position Dr. Marcus had offered had evolved into something even more meaningful than originally described, involving collaboration with child psychologists, pediatric social workers, and family counselors to develop reading interventions for young patients facing medical trauma. My apartment in Back Bay was small but elegant, located within walking distance of the hospital, and featuring bay windows that looked out over tree-lined streets where autumn leaves created carpets of gold and crimson. The neighborhood felt sophisticated without being intimidating, populated by young professionals, graduate students, and families who valued education and intellectual curiosity over material displays of wealth. The work itself was deeply fulfilling in ways that my previous library position had only hinted at. Developing age-appropriate book lists for children dealing with cancer, cardiac surgery, or chronic illness required careful consideration of emotional themes, reading levels, and psychological impact. The program aimed to help young patients process their medical experiences through characters who face similar challenges and emerge stronger. Dr. Marcus had become more than a colleague. Our friendship had developed into something that felt like the foundation of a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared interests, and compatible values. His intelligence was matched by kindness that extended to patients' colleagues and anyone who crossed his path during difficult moments. Our relationship was developing slowly and naturally, without the pressure or manipulation that had characterized my family interactions for so many years. Madison had surprised everyone with her commitment to personal growth and accountability. She had moved into a modest apartment in Denver, taken an entry-level marketing position that matched her actual qualifications, and begun attending therapy sessions that focused on developing authentic self-worth rather than external validation. Her social media presence had been completely transformed, featuring honest posts about her journey toward becoming someone worthy of respect. The most significant change in Madison was her willingness to make amends to people she had treated poorly during her years of prioritizing social advancement over basic decency. She had contacted former classmates, co-workers, and family friends to acknowledge specific instances of cruel or dismissive behavior, accepting responsibility without making excuses or expecting immediate forgiveness. Madison's relationship with Trevor remained uncertain but hopeful. They had been dating casually while she worked on personal development, with the understanding that marriage would only be reconsidered if and when she demonstrated genuine character transformation. Trevor's willingness to invest in Madison's growth process spoke well of his own character and suggested that their relationship might eventually be rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. Patricia's transformation had been more difficult but equally necessary. The therapy sessions required by our settlement agreement had forced her to confront decades of manipulative behavior, financial irresponsibility, and emotional abuse disguised as maternal guidance. Her progress was slow and sometimes resentful, but she was beginning to acknowledge the damage her choices had caused to our family relationships. Patricia had been required to sell the family home and move into a modest senior living community that provided structure and social support while preventing her from accumulating new debt or engaging in financial schemes. The lifestyle reduction was painful for someone who had defined herself through material possessions and social status, but it was necessary for her psychological and financial rehabilitation. The most meaningful aspect of Patricia's accountability process was her systematic contact with family members and friends who had been deceived by her lies about my character and mental health. These conversations had been difficult for everyone involved, but they had also provided opportunities for healing relationships that had been damaged by years of false narratives. My relationship with extended family members had been transformed as they learned the truth about Patricia's deception and my actual personality and accomplishments. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had been distant or dismissive based on Patricia's stories, were now reaching out to rebuild connections that could have been meaningful throughout my adult life, if not for deliberate sabotage. The financial restitution had provided security that allowed me to make career and lifestyle decisions based on personal fulfillment rather than economic desperation. The restored inheritance money was invested conservatively to provide long-term financial stability, while my increased salary from the hospital position ensured that I could maintain comfortable lifestyle without anxiety about unexpected expenses. But the most significant change was internal. The woman who had accepted emotional crumbs from family members who treated her as an embarrassment had been replaced by someone who expected respect, kindness, and authenticity in all relationships. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been thorough enough to create permanent changes in how I approach personal and professional interactions. The confidence I had gained during my week at the Alpine Sanctuary had proven sustainable when tested by real-world challenges and ongoing family dynamics. Standing up to Patricia and Madison during their resort confrontation had established precedents for self-advocacy that continued to serve me well in Boston, where my opinions and expertise were valued by colleagues who recognized intelligence and compassion when they encountered it. Dr. Marcus had introduced me to his family during a weekend visit to their Martha's Vineyard estate, where I had been welcomed warmly by people who judged character rather than social pedigree. His parents were interested in my work with pediatric patients and impressed by my innovative approaches to therapeutic reading programs. The acceptance felt genuine rather than performative, based on who I actually was rather than who I pretended to be. The program I was developing at the hospital had attracted national attention from other medical centers interested in implementing similar approaches to helping young patients cope with medical trauma through literature. My expertise was being sought by colleagues across the country, and I was being invited to speak at conferences where my ideas were received with enthusiasm and respect. The professional recognition felt surreal after years of having my accomplishments dismissed or ignored by family members who couldn't see past their own limited understanding of success and value. But it also felt earned and sustainable based on actual expertise and meaningful contributions rather than manipulation or social connections. 1 year after that devastating phone call from Madison, I found myself preparing for an event that represented everything I had never dared to hope for my personal relationships. Sarah, my loyal best friend who had supported me through the darkest period of family crisis, was getting married to David, a kind pediatric nurse she had met at Denver Children's Hospital during my absence in Boston. Sarah had asked me to serve as her maid of honor, emphasizing that she wanted someone who understood the value of authentic friendship and genuine love to stand beside her during the most important moment of her life. The contrast with Madison's wedding, where I had been excluded for failing to meet arbitrary social standards, highlighted how dramatically my understanding of relationships had evolved. The wedding was everything Madison's elaborate production had failed to be intimate, heartfelt and focused on celebrating love rather than impressing observers. Sarah and David had chosen a small mountain chapel outside Denver, surrounded by aspen trees and natural beauty that provided perfect backdrop for promises made with sincerity, rather than social media potential. My maid of honor speech addressed themes that had been shaped by my own journey toward understanding the difference between performing relationships and living them authentically. I spoke about how Sarah had demonstrated friendship through consistent presence during difficulties, rather than conditional support based on my ability to enhance her social status or provide services she needed. The guest list included people who valued character over credentials, hospital colleagues, childhood friends, family members who had maintained relationships through genuine affection rather than social obligation. The conversations were meaningful because they were based on shared interests, mutual respect, and authentic concern for each other's well-being rather than competitive status displays. Madison attended the wedding as my guest, having requested permission to begin rebuilding our relationship through small gestures that demonstrated her commitment to treating me with respect and kindness. Her presence was tentative but genuine, and her behavior throughout the event showed evidence of the personal growth she had been working toward through therapy and self-reflection. Trevor had accompanied Madison to the wedding, their relationship having progressed to the point where marriage seemed possible again, but only after Madison had proven her ability to maintain honesty and integrity even when it was uncomfortable or socially disadvantageous. Their rekindled romance was based on realistic assessment of each other's flaws and strengths rather than fantasy projections of perfect partnership. Patricia had not been invited to attend a boundary that Madison had supported, despite the potential for family conflict. Patricia's accountability process was ongoing, but she had not yet earned the right to participate in celebrations that required trust, good judgment, and genuine care for others' happiness. Her exclusion was natural consequence of her behavior rather than punishment designed to cause pain. Dr. Marcus had flown in from Boston to escort me to the wedding, our relationship having deepened into partnership that felt sustainable and growth-oriented for both of us. His presence at Sarah's wedding symbolized how my personal life had been transformed by people who appreciated intelligence, kindness, and authenticity, rather than demanding performance or compliance. The hospital program I had developed was expanding to include partnerships with schools, libraries, and community centers throughout Massachusetts, creating opportunities for children facing various types of trauma to access therapeutic reading interventions. The work was being recognized as innovative and effective, leading to grant funding that would allow nationwide implementation of similar programs. My father would have been proud to see how the values he had instilled through our shared love of books and learning had evolved into meaningful career that helped vulnerable children find healing through literature. The scholarship fund I had established in his memory was providing educational opportunities for underprivileged students who demonstrated passion for reading despite economic obstacles. The financial security provided by Patricia's restitution had allowed me to make career decisions based on purpose rather than salary requirements. The freedom to pursue meaningful work without anxiety about economic survival was a gift my father had intended to provide through careful financial planning, and its restoration felt like receiving his blessing on the path I was choosing. But the most profound change was internal. The transformation from someone who accepted emotional scraps to someone who expected authentic love and respect in all relationships. The week at the Alpine Sanctuary had been catalyst for recognizing my own worth, but the lasting change had come through consistent practice of self-advocacy and boundary setting in everyday situations. Standing in that mountain chapel, watching Sarah promise to love David with the same authenticity she had shown in our friendship, I realized that being excluded from Madison's wedding had been the beginning of my real life, rather than rejection that confirmed my worthlessness. Sometimes the most painful experiences redirect us toward our true destiny by forcing us to recognize patterns that we had been accepting as normal. The dancing at Sarah's reception was joyful rather than performative, with guests celebrating love that felt genuine and sustainable rather than trying to impress each other with sophisticated moves or expensive clothing. Marcus and I moved together naturally, our partnership based on compatibility rather than conquest respect, rather than rescue fantasies. Madison approached me during the reception to express gratitude for my willingness to give her opportunities to prove her growth rather than writing her off as permanently unredeemable. Her acknowledgement of my forgiveness felt earned rather than entitled, based on changed behavior rather than family obligation or guilt manipulation. The evening ended with quiet conversations among friends who had chosen each other based on affection and shared values rather than social advantage or family connection. The contrast with the networking atmosphere that had characterized Madison's wedding highlighted how much my understanding of relationships had matured through experiencing genuine acceptance and respect. As I write this story from my sunlit Boston apartment, 2 years have passed since that devastating phone call that excluded me from Madison's wedding. The woman who once accepted emotional crumbs from family members who treated her as an embarrassment has been replaced by someone who builds relationships based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values rather than desperate need for approval. The therapeutic reading program I developed has been implemented in over 50 hospitals nationwide, helping thousands of children process medical trauma through carefully selected literature that validates their experiences and offers hope for healing. My expertise is now sought by colleagues across the country, and I regularly speak at conferences where my innovations in bibliotherapy are received with enthusiasm and professional respect. Dr. Marcus and I were married 6 months ago in a ceremony that celebrated authenticity over appearances, surrounded by people who value character over credentials. Our wedding was intimate and meaningful, focused on promises made with sincerity rather than social media potential. The contrast with Madison's original wedding disaster highlighted how dramatically different my life had become when guided by genuine values rather than fear of rejection. Madison and Trevor remarried 8 months after their original ceremony, having rebuilt their relationship on foundations of honesty, mutual respect, and realistic assessment of each other's flaws and strengths. Madison's commitment to personal growth had proven genuine and sustainable, evidenced by her willingness to maintain integrity even when it was uncomfortable or socially disadvantageous. Patricia's transformation has been slower but equally significant. The therapy required by our settlement agreement has helped her recognize decades of manipulative behavior and begin developing appropriate boundaries with family members. Her progress is measured not by dramatic revelations, but by consistent small choices to prioritize honesty and consideration over social advancement and personal advantage. The family gatherings we now share are smaller, but infinitely healthier, built on authentic relationships rather than performative dynamics designed to impress observers or maintain false narratives. Patricia, Madison, and I have learned to interact as adults who respect each other's autonomy rather than players in toxic dramas that require victims and perpetrators. The financial security provided by Patricia's restitution has allowed me to make career and lifestyle decisions based on purpose rather than economic desperation. My father's careful planning had been designed to provide exactly this freedom, and its restoration feels like receiving his blessing on the path I have chosen for building meaningful life. But the most profound lesson from this experience concerns the nature of authentic relationships and the courage required to demand respect rather than accepting whatever treatment others choose to provide. The week I spent at the Alpine Sanctuary wasn't just luxury indulgence. It was education in recognizing my own worth and establishing standards for how others could access my time, energy, and emotional resources. Standing up to Patricia and Madison during their resort confrontation had established precedents for self-advocacy that continue to serve me well in personal and professional relationships. The confidence I gained from that experience has proven sustainable when tested by real-world challenges and ongoing family dynamics that require ongoing boundary maintenance. The children I work with in the hospital often struggle with feelings of powerlessness and vulnerability that I recognize from my own family experiences. Helping them find strength and hope through literature has taught me that healing is possible even from profound betrayals, but it requires willingness to acknowledge pain rather than minimizing it. Seek appropriate support rather than suffering alone, and establish healthy boundaries rather than accepting whatever treatment others choose to provide. Sarah's friendship throughout this journey has demonstrated what authentic relationships look like when based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than convenience or social advantage. Her loyalty during my darkest period and celebration of my growth and success have provided a model for the kinds of connections that nourish rather than drain emotional resources. The most surprising discovery has been how much energy becomes available when you stop trying to earn love from people who are fundamentally unwilling or unable to provide it. The mental and emotional resources I had been spending on managing family dysfunction were rechanneled toward building career success, meaningful friendships, and romantic partnership based on compatibility rather than rescue fantasies. Looking back, I can see that being excluded from Madison's wedding was the catalyst I needed to recognize patterns that I had been accepting as normal family dynamics. Sometimes the most painful rejections redirect us toward our true destiny by forcing us to confront situations that we have been tolerating rather than addressing appropriately. The luxury vacation that began as defiant gesture became education in recognizing my own worth and demanding treatment that reflects authentic value rather than whatever others choose to offer. The mountain sanctuary provided space for transformation that would have been impossible within familiar environments that reinforced old patterns and expectations. Marcus often tells his pediatric surgery colleagues that healing requires creating conditions where natural recovery processes can function effectively, and the same principle applies to emotional and psychological growth. The Alpine Sanctuary had provided exactly those conditions: safety, respect, meaningful engagement, and freedom from toxic influences that had been poisoning my self-perception for decades. True family isn't defined by blood relations or social expectations, but by those who celebrate your authentic self and support your growth toward becoming the person you are meant to be. Sometimes walking away from toxic dynamics is the greatest gift you can give both yourself and others because it forces everyone to confront their behavior and choose growth over comfort. The standards I learned to establish and maintain during that transformative week have guided every relationship decision since then, from professional collaborations to romantic partnership to ongoing family interactions. People who want access to my time and energy must demonstrate respect for my autonomy, appreciation for my authentic personality, and commitment to mutual, rather than one-sided relationships. The woman who once begged for emotional scraps from family members who treated her as an embarrassment now builds connections with people who recognize intelligence, compassion, and integrity when they encounter it. The transformation required courage to demand better treatment, wisdom to recognize authentic affection when offered, and persistence to maintain boundaries even when others pressure for return to familiar dysfunctional patterns. If you're currently accepting treatment from family members or others that makes you question your worth, I encourage you to consider whether those relationships are based on genuine love or simply habit and convenience. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away from toxic dynamics long enough to remember who you are when you're not trying to earn approval from people who may be fundamentally unable to provide it. The mountain sanctuary where this transformation began was expensive and felt financially irresponsible at the time, but it proved to be the best investment I have ever made in my own future, happiness, and success. Sometimes we have to spend money we don't think we can afford to create experiences that remind us of our actual worth and potential. What experiences in your own life have forced you to recognize your worth and demand better treatment from others? Have you ever had to walk away from family dynamics that were toxic, even when it felt scary or guilt-inducing? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when standing up for yourself led to positive changes you never expected. Please remember to like this video if my story resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building authentic relationships, and share this with anyone who might need encouragement to recognize their own worth and demand respectful treatment. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage to create the life and relationships you truly deserve.